Okay, thank you. Welcome, Dr. Sverko. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. I'm just going to introduce you. So Dr. Elena Sverko joins us online from the US. After completion of psychology degrees whilst at St Hilda's, she became a research officer in the Nuffield Department of Population Health in Oxford University, and more particularly a member of the Oxford Group for Children's Potential, a research group organised by Dr. Jane Mellanby. And I believe you continued as a member of that group, which was disbanded after Dr. Mellanby's death. Over to you, Dr. Sverko.
Hi, I just realized that I can't share my screen.
You should be able to now.
Oh, okay, yes, I can now. Great.
So sorry, I should have just said the title. The title of the lecture today is Different Types of Learning in Research and Education, as written there.
Great. Hello, everyone. So,
hello.
Today, first, I'm going to talk about how what we research in psychology about different types of learning can inform educational practice. So I'll go through implicit learning, rote learning, and then approaches to learning. And finally, I'm going to go through why making students do research is a good tool in education. So education involves learning, and psychologists investigate what learning is, how it happens in the mind and in the brain. I've been very fortunate to work with Dr. Jane Mellanby on various projects involving learning. So children learning language, children learning science and mathematics, and undergraduates learning neuroanatomy. Jane was very interested in education and believed that research in psychology can inform educational practice. And she and Katie Fierbold published a wonderful book titled Education and Learning, an Evidence-Based Approach. Now, in this book, there is chapters about memory and learning, but also it talks about creativity, measuring potential, sex differences, changes occurring with age. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. Now, there wouldn't be much point in learning anything if we didn't remember it for a reasonable amount of time. And it has been shown that long-term memory comprises semantic memory, memory for facts, and episodic memory, memory for your life's events. There is also procedural memory, sometimes called implicit memory. And procedural memory refers to the way individuals unconsciously learn a skill and can reproduce that skill without thought. And examples include riding a bicycle or playing the piano. There are also cognitive skills, for example, grammar. Now, interesting thing about grammar is that it doesn't require any instruction or correction. So children listen to the native speech and internalize the language's grammar just from that. So this is an example of implicit learning. Now, I've done research on grammar with Jane Mellanby, first as part of my DPhil project, and then as part of a research group called Oxford Group for Children's Potential. And we looked at complex grammar acquisition, in particular acquisition of hypothetical conditional sentences. Now, an example of such a sentence would be, if Simon had worked harder, he would have passed the exam. So what's so special about these sentences? They're used for constructing logical arguments, for future planning and formulating hypotheses. So acquiring the sentence is not just a question of improved linguistic skills. It's about children being able
Dr.
to...
Sverko, I'll need to stop you there for a moment. The sound is going away, I think. It is for me anyway. I'm not sure what we could do about that. Shall we try again and just try to be a little nearer your microphone, or yeah, could you continue, and I'll only stop you again if we can't hear.
Maybe if you mute your side, have you muted your side?
It's not muted, so it's good. Let her continue speaking. Yeah. It's the maximum volume.
It's fine if she just
It's fine, just lean forward and it's fine.
don't touch anything there. That's it on the studio side.
Sorry, my big problem is I don't hear very clearly, so, but I can tell whether it's loud enough. Shall we try again? Thank you.
Shall I start from the beginning or?
No, just start where you left off.
Okay. But let me know if you have trouble hearing. I can try to put headphones on my side, and that might help.
The audience is saying that might be helpful. No? Oh, sorry, they can hear you now. I can't, they can.
Okay? Okay, so as I was saying, conditional sentences, hypothetical conditional sentences are used for logical arguments, future planning, and formulating hypotheses. So children acquiring the sentences is not just a question of linguistic skills, it's about them being able to fully understand what is said to them and to formulate and express their thoughts effectively in many parts of the curriculum. So in history, we might get a question, if Germany had not invaded Poland, then the Second War would not have happened, discussed. Or in a science lesson, we might get an explanation, if you had dropped the potassium in the water bath, you would have been burned. We looked at hypothetical conditional sentences in a longitudinal project where we followed up a group of children from year 1 of primary school until year 6 of primary school. And here is just a snapshot of results. So in year 2, just over 25% of these children were able to do hypothetical conditional sentences. In year 4, it was closer to 60%, and by year 5, it was 70%. But even so, in year 5, when children are 9 to 10 years old, there is still 30% of children who have not fully acquired hypothetical conditional sentence grammar. To summarize our findings for you, there are individual differences in hypothetical conditional sentence acquisition. Some children acquire them late, and we believe that some don't acquire them at all. Performance on hypothetical conditional sentences in early primary school predicts reading in later years, particularly reading comprehension. And in another project with Emma Gabot, we also found that there is conditional sentence comprehension is related to children's understanding of scientific principles, independently of nonverbal and verbal intelligence. So to give you an example of what I'm talking about, it's an idea of testing a hypothesis and control variable strategy. So that's when you change one variable but keep all the other variables constant. So understanding of these principles is related to hypothetical conditional sentences. In another line of work, Jane and colleagues looked at underachievers. Underachievers are children who are performing more poorly in school than would be expected from their potential. And the potential is measured by VESPACH. It's verbal and spatial reasoning test for children. It was developed by Jane over the years. It's a culture fair intelligence test, which is done on a computer. It does not require any reading. Children listen to all the instructions and stimuli through the headphones. They can listen to the stimuli and look at the stimuli as many times as they want. There is no time limit on the test. and they get a lot of practice questions. So even if they have trouble understanding the instructions, we usually get the point of the test just from getting feedback for the practice questions. And now, in one study with Julia Badger, we tested over 2,000 children and identified 6% of them as underachievers. And the group of underachievers was much very similar group of children who were not underachieving. Underachievers had poorer phonological decoding, poorer short-term memory, and also poorer complex grammar acquisition. So from that, researchers concluded that complex grammar acquisition is one of the factors that contributes to underachievement in school. So I hope I was able to demonstrate for you that grammar acquisition is important in education. There are other skills, which are cognitive skills, which are first acquired explicitly, become implicit with practice, such as reading. And there may be other skills, cognitive skills being acquired implicitly, which researchers have not focused on yet. So I always found that when doing a lot of algebra problems of a particular type, after practicing them, if you look at another problem, your brain solves it almost automatically. So maybe there is some implicit learning happening in mathematics as well. Well, the problem is that in the modern education system in Britain, repeating something many times in order to learn it is frowned upon. It's considered rote learning, not desirable. Learning for meaning is seen as most important. However, that's not how implicit learning works. Implicit learning requires practice and repetition. So there should be space for repetition in the education system. Let's talk some more about rote learning. Rote learning has been part of the education process for many years. For example, in the book, Jane and Katie talk about medieval schools in Europe, where children had to learn verses from the Bible in Latin, or parts of Roman texts in Latin. In the current days, a lot of children have to memorize multiplication tables. Also, poetry. In many education systems, children memorize poems. We know from a lot of research now that learning changes the brain. One of the most striking examples of this is the findings that there is increased volume of the hippocampus in experienced Lancy drivers, which is associated with extensive knowledge of London streets. So does memorizing things in childhood change the brain? We don't know that yet. Young brains have increased plasticity, and rote learning when young might recruit more neurons into the circuits dedicated to memory and learning. So more complex networks would be available in adulthood when there is less plasticity. So it's just one of the hypotheses of what might be happening. So we don't know enough about developing brain to dismiss rote learning from the education system completely. It's quite possible that learning songs and poems and even multiplication tables when young does something good for the brain. Of course, I'm not suggesting that we should rote learn everything. Learning for meaning is still the golden standard. And this brings me to the next part of my talk, approaches to learning. Well, how you learn is a choice. Students are not passive recipients of information. In the 70s, Marta Nasalgio investigated how students learn by interviewing them and seeing how they interact with an academic text. They put forward the concept of approach to learning, which was later expanded by people trying to formulate scales in order to quantify approach to learning. There is general consensus that there are two contrasting approaches, deep and surface. And deep approach involves searching for meaning, relating different concepts, incorporating new information into existing knowledge, and trying to form a general picture of the field you are studying. Surface approach, on the other hand, involves rote learning, focusing on discrete elements without integration, and not going beyond the course requirements. Now, whether a student uses a deep or surface approach is not like a personality trait. It's not set in stone. A student might have a preferred approach due to the long-term goals, the personality, or the previous educational experience. And there are also situational factors which determine which approach is adopted, such as time available or task demands. And Beaton and colleagues did an extensive literature review, and they concluded that it's actually students' perceptions of situational factors that's the most important. So students seeing the workloads as excessive and inappropriate might make them more likely to adopt a more surface approach. And another interesting factor is enjoyment of study. Enjoyment of the study process is associated with deeper approach. And I'd like to tell you about the study I've done with Jane on approach to learning in medical students here at Oxford. So in the second year, preclinical medical students complete neuroanatomy course through lectures, tutorials, and practicals. And we also do neuroanatomy computer-aided learning course, CAL for short. And we've done the study for 7 years, where we asked preclinical medical students to complete the approach to learning questionnaire while they were doing the CAL course. And we also had to answer some questions about the neuroanatomy CAL course and about the studies in general. And we found that the enjoyment of the CAL course was associated with deeper approach. And there was 25% of variance share, which is quite a lot statistically. And I believe this relationship goes in both directions. So students who enjoy the CAL course are more likely to really get into material, to think about it and connect different topics in their mind. On the other hand, students who do choose a deep approach are more likely to enjoy what they're doing. Just memorizing unrelated bits of information takes a lot of effort and is boring for most people. We also found that high enjoyment of the CAL course was associated with better performance on the formative neuroanatomy assessment based on the course. And furthermore, greater enjoyment of preclinical medicine in the second year was associated with higher final exam scores and better research project score. So it seems that students who enjoyed what they were doing were most likely to be successful academically. I'll share a lot of different factors which contribute to academic success, but maybe the enjoyment of study is one of these factors. So let's think about the goals of education at university, specifically this university. So students graduating from Oxford University should be able to seek out and obtain knowledge in various ways, incorporate new knowledge into the existing knowledge framework, and be able to evaluate evidence critically. I think these goals align quite well with the deep approach to learning. On the other hand, Oxford courses place high demands on students. Bachelor's courses are mostly 3 years, and there is a lot of information to take in. So the perceptions of students that were drowning under this information load might prevent them from using the most successful deep approach. And I would just like to say here that from what we know from psychology about how the brain works, the brain wants to find connections. The brain wants to impose meaning of the information one receives. So memorizing unrelated bits of information takes much more effort than trying to put information into the existing knowledge framework. So deep approach is actually aligns better with how the brain works. And this brings me to the final part of my talk, research. So psychology undergraduates and preclinical medicine undergraduates at Oxford, as part of the finals, complete a research project. Researchers from several departments proposed topics for them to choose from. At least that's how it used to work when I worked for the university. I co-supervised with Jane quite a few of these projects. And I believe that completing the research project is good for all students, not just those wanting to go into academia. Research project provides students with a snippet of what it's like to do research in the real world. Here are a few reasons of why research projects are good for the student. So first, there is intrinsic motivation. Doing your own study is fun, it's an adventure. Also, I found that students who chose, medical students at least, who chose to do projects in developmental psychology, they often said that they're doing it because they want to become pediatricians, so they want to see what it's like working with children. So doing project with us had a deeper personal meaning for them, long-term goals. And doing a research project requires deeper understanding of the material. So in order to do a successful project, one needs to interpret the results, relate conclusions to existing research, make suggestions for future directions. These kinds of things cannot be done with just reading one textbook or just skimming through a few abstracts. You really need to get into the material in order to write up a good project. Critical thinking during a project, you have to identify its limitations. You have to discuss why your findings might be different from previous research. So it does stretch one's critical thinking. I've mentioned memory being divided into episodic and semantic. Those parts of memory are distinct, but they are also intricately intertwined. And engaging both episodic and semantic memory provides additional way of encoding information and link for access of information. And another point is research methods and statistics. So doing research yourself under appropriate guidance allows one to get more awareness of the considerations that need to be taken to design a valid experiment. It's all easy on paper. You change one variable, keep other variables constant. However, it's much more difficult in the field. For example, in large-scale studies with children, often you can't control everything. So you have to parcel out some relevant variables statistically. And each research field has its own challenges. In the type of work I've done, we have to think about, for example, do you select equal numbers of boys and girls? Do you exclude children who speak several languages? Do you exclude children who are not native speakers? So there are a lot of things to consider, and having to go through those decisions with your supervisor makes one more aware of what to look out for when reading research from other people. So it also builds on critical thinking. And a lot of research projects require statistical analysis. Doing statistics on raw data is quite different from doing statistics for the exam or for a practical, where the conditions are much more controlled. So it allows students to acquire really important skills. And just to give an example, I've had a student who entered all her data, did a lot of analysis on the data, and then came for a meeting and was complaining that her values looked strange and everything was coming out not as predicted, so she didn't know what to do. And I sat with her and we looked at the data, and I asked her just to do some simple histograms of her most important variables. Well, it turned out that she had a really big outlier. So she made a typo, and when entering 11.5, she missed the dot. So a child had a score of 115 on a test where the maximum score was 25. And that's completely free of all her analysis. So all the work she's done was in vain, and she had to start from scratch after correcting the error. So it's an important lesson you usually only learn once. So you have to really check your data before you start working with it. You have to look at some simple graphs, look at the averages, and so on. So statistical skills and skills in research methods is what type of transferable skills that all job recruiters like to talk about nowadays. So I hope I've persuaded you that research projects are useful both for promoting the right type of learning in students and for acquiring useful skills, which might be relevant in other fields. Okay, so let me sum up some of the basic points I've talked about today. So there should be room for implicit learning and skill acquisition in education. Skill acquisition requires practice to reach proficiency. Once proficiency is reached, there is more capacity to concentrate on other things. So we really need to be room for practice and repetition in education. On the other hand, deep approach is best for acquiring knowledge, and students enjoying studying is associated with deeper approach to learning. Doing research encourages deeper approach and allows one to acquire both knowledge and skills. Now, when Jane started working on approach to learning, I believe that the main idea was to see if it could be one of the factors for selecting students for university who would be more successful. Well, it turned out that approach to learning is quite unstable, so it does change a lot while people go through university. So it's not one of the factors for selecting students on. But from the results that we found with approach to learning, maybe selecting students for university should be based on those who will enjoy studying and who think that doing research is fun. So maybe that way we'll find students who will be really successful. Okay, I want just to take this moment to express my deepest gratitude to Dr. Jane Mellanby for allowing me to be part of all this interesting research and for the opportunities and guidance that she gave me over the years, first as my moral tutor and then as my DPhil supervisor, and also for inspiring and nurturing the love of science in me and a lot of other people. So thank you for listening to me today.
I hope you could hear that appreciation of your presentation. Thank you very much, Dr. Swerko, and for your appreciation of Dr. Mellanby. Are you able to answer questions if we have any?
Yes. I can hear you well when you're speaking now, so I should be able to hear the questions.
Okay. Are there any immediate questions? We'll just wait for the microphone and hopefully you'll be able to hear. Otherwise, we'll repeat the question.
Yes. I was wondering whether and to what extent you think the particular subject of study influences the way in which things are learned. Do you think that it's different for reading versus mathematics versus music versus history, say, or do you think there's a lot of commonalities between all
Right.
subjects?
I need one of these students who is going to help me to pick up the questions. Is anyone here?
She's got a microphone.
Have you? Yeah. Could you repeat that question for us?
Did Elena hear it?
Did you hear that question?
I missed the very beginning, but I heard most of it.
You almost certainly would have missed the first bit.
Does the mode of learning depend to any very large extent on the particular subject of study?
My understanding is that in every subject there might be an aspect of it that's just acquisition of information, and other aspects of it that are more like skill acquisition. so there would be different types of learning in every subject. So as I said, I think that in mathematics, a lot of it starts with acquisition of information, but there are also skills that children build in mathematics, and those require a lot of practice. And so I think some of the skills then become automatic with practice.
Thanks very, very much.
Thank you. Any more? There's another one coming.
So what what methods do you think you'd be able to use in order to get people to do more research projects in their daily life?
I don't know about daily life. My opinion is if there is like a space in university course to do more, maybe smaller research projects, that should be done, but I realize that most courses are already too packed with what needs to be gone through in order to do that. So I was thinking maybe like virtual projects, so like a virtual reality being created where students can go in and do projects. So it's almost like a computer game, but then they have to write it up, and maybe some researchers at university can look at the write-up and give feedback in the form of which would be done like a peer review for journals. That would give students additional practice on what it's like in the real world.
Any more questions or comments? I've enjoyed looking at the book which you recommended, Education and Learning, by Jane Mellanby and Katie Theobald. I was particularly I haven't read the whole thing yet, but I was particularly interested in the active brain imaging which had been done, which seemed to show the how much more efficient the brain could work after information had been taken in. So presumably that's what's going on when you have rote learning of mathematical tables, and then you want to retrieve that information. Until you've learnt it, there's a lot of brain activity, glucose uptake going on. Once you've learnt it, the process is much more efficient, and that's exactly what it feels like.
Yes, we believe that's exactly what's happening. So there is a lot of activity when something is learned, and it takes up many parts of the brain in order to do it, but when it becomes more automatic, and a smaller part of the brain when is involved in processing. So yeah, that's the idea, but there have been a lot of studies showing that learning changes the brain. So like I've mentioned, the London taxi drivers, also the studies in professional violinists. So the parts of the brain responsible for kind of fine motor skills to do with finger movements way bigger in professional violinists. So whatever you are doing, it seems that the brain will dedicate more capacity to that. There is some indication that it might take away from processing other things, but there is much less taken away than there is doing. So there is only might be a little bit taken away, but there will be a lot dedicated to processing of a particular skill or knowledge you're trying to acquire. You see what I mean?
Thank you very much. It would have been very nice to have had you with us, but thank you for all the work and time you've put in, and connecting with us this afternoon, which will be rather earlier with you. So thank you very much indeed, and we hope to meet you one day. And now I'm going to make way for the current medical tutors to introduce us to some of their former students who are now doctors in practice.
Hello everyone, there's going to be a small hiatus while we do some technological skullduggery.
Talk amongst yourselves, but not too loudly.
Charlie is our preclinical tutor, and we're doing a sort of double act after tea. This section was supposed to be about medical electives from our previous students. Many of our previous students are now F1s, and on-call rotors have intervened. Oh, happy days. So we have recordings from students who did medical electives, but we have in person 2 older graduates, mature, I don't know what to call you, but Bethan and Soam, could you stand up? Because I think we need to demonstrate our sartorial. This was not planned, that we would both be wearing blue and pink, but it's worked out that way. So Bethan and Soam started in the heady days of 2014, unaware that the end of their training would be poleaxed by a virus. So they pootled through their clinical training, and then in March 2020, I shut medical school. So that's a load of fun. And what happened was we graduated, along with other medical schools, we graduated our cohort early. So normally students graduate in July, start work usually the 3rd or 4th of August. We shut the school on March the 13th because there was only one diagnosis in every hospital in the country, and we weren't quite sure whether we could protect our students and our patients, and we graduated the finalists early. So you both graduated in sort of mid-April, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Roughly. We graduated in people in tranches. So as opposed to elective, because it wasn't really an elective, Bethan and Soam are going to talk about what it was like to be what was called the interim F1s. So F1 is the Nev Houseman, for those in old money, foundation year training, the training you do immediately post-graduation. And for the first time in history, there was this post created called the interim F1s. So people who were entering the workforce early in order to support the COVID pandemic. An extraordinary time to enter the workforce. I think the transition from undergraduate medical student to foundation training is hard enough. I think to step into the NHS when people are dying hither and thither was a hugely big ask. So I'm very grateful to Bethan and for Soam for talking about their experiences. We can do Q&A afterwards. I then have recordings of students graduates who can't be with us but wanted to talk about their medical electives, which we can use or not depending on time. I will not keep you from your tea. That's the most important. The only other thing I have to say is during tea time, you have some homework. In your folder packs, you will find small pieces of, don't worry about it now, it's like dealing with students, don't do it now. You will find in your packs a piece of paper that is unlabelled but covered in questions. These are questions from the BMAT. This is the clinical aptitude test that is used in Oxford, Cambridge, UCL and Imperial. We've got some questions for you. to see how you would do in the BMAT over tea, and then Charlie will give you the correct answers when we get there after. But anyway, on to Bethan and then Sarah. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone. My name's Bethan, and I am currently a core trainee in psychiatry in London. But as Kathy said, I was a proud Hildebeest back in the day, and I graduated in 2020. And I was asked to come back and talk about what was meant to be my medical elective. And I think, so the money raised today will go to the Jane Mellanby Memorial Fund, which funds people to go on their medical elective in their final year. And yeah, it's a real pleasure to be back. I've not been back in so long, so it's really nice. And when I was here, I was saying all of it was still a building site, so it's amazing. I walked in and I just didn't recognise it, to be honest, but it's great. And I thought I'd start by sort of setting the scene a little bit. So Kathy touched on it a little bit, but it was the winter of 2020 we would have sat our finals. And as probably a lot of you in the audience would know, it's months of living, breathing, dreaming, abdominal examination, upper and lower limb examination, how to put a catheter in a plastic mannequin, all that kind of stuff. And then you finally sit your finals and, you know, you're about to be a fully fledged doctor. So it was an exciting time. And this is a photo of, I think there's 5 out of 6 of us there from Hilda's. So you'll recognise yourself up there. And this was we'd just come out of our last final exam. And so having started sort of first year as terrified first year medical students, we're now about to be still terrified fully fledged doctors. So post this, you then, between starting work, which we were meant to do in the August, you then have your 10-week elective to go on, and that's kind of what everyone would say is the highlight of their medical school, and people go to far-flung, corners of the world to practice medicine all over. And I had booked my flights. I was going to go for 10 weeks to Australia and Fiji, hopefully to see a lot of interesting general medicine, but also a lot of beaches, koalas, all this kind of stuff. I also think I've got the scale really wrong, but sun creams are really important, especially for redheads over in Australia. It was all planned. But as we know, January 2020, first 2 patients in the UK tested positive for COVID-19. And round about that time, I think I'd gone back home to live in London because it was all a bit uncertain. We didn't know what was happening. And with each day of Boris Johnson's face coming up on the TV, I went from being like, oh, how bad is this going to be, to being like, okay, it's going to be pretty bad. And there were murmurings that potentially medical students would be graduated early if they're in their final year. But it didn't really, to be honest, feel real until we got, I think, the actual email from you, Kathy, being like, this is happening. And I remember kind of sitting at home, getting the email, and it was a weird one, because I think by this stage, everyone was stuck at home, restless, didn't really know what we were doing with our lives. And I think, although it was really daunting, I think a lot of us probably felt, we're as ready as we're ever going to be, and kind of wanted to go out and join the workforce and help, I guess. And so what did that really look like in reality? So I was due to start my F1 in the August at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital in London, and I got an email from Chelsea and Westminster in London saying that they were going to introduce this new role called an interim foundation year 1 doctor, and it basically meant that you would start 3 months early, and you were working essentially as an F1 paired with an F1, because obviously the current F1s were still in their post. And we were paid as F1s, and it was kind of similar to sort of a 3-month very intense induction, but in the midst of the pandemic. And I started, at this time, my hospital was working on what they called a COVID rota. So the whole hospital had been split into firms, so kind of almost like back in the day when you worked within one team, and that was your team, day in, day out. So I was assigned my team. There were 8 of us. I think it was, me, 2 F1s, 2 SHOs, a reg and a consultant. And we were working 5 days on, 5 days off, 5 nights on, 5 days off, and that just sort of continued through weekends, and the shifts were, I think, 12 or 13 hours, so I remember at the end of the night shifts, having never done nights before, really, it was intense, and I think I also, it just feels like a bit of this period of time where, because everyone else was in lockdown, it kind of made it okay, because you didn't mind working weekends, because none of your friends were out, you weren't missing out on stuff. But it did feel like I just remember not knowing what day of the week it was at any time. So it was a bit strange. And I think I sort of wanted to talk a little bit about the bits which were tougher, I guess. And I think, as Kathy says, the first one definitely is that starting F1, regardless of when you start, is always tough. You know, it's exciting, it's the first time you're a doctor, but it's a very steep learning curve. And I think doing that amidst the pandemic just sort of magnified that a little bit more. And I just remember being sort of my first month, I was so desperate to prove myself. I felt out of my depth. And so anytime someone kind of offered something that I thought that I could do and was in my capabilities, I'd be like the first to be like, yeah, I can do that. And I remember we were on a ward round, and someone, I think, became unwell and needed IV access urgently, and no one could get a cannula in. And they were like, oh, we're going to need the ultrasound. And I was like, I've seen the ultrasound machine, because we had to share one between sort of 3 wards. And I'd definitely seen it earlier. So I went running off, got the ultrasound machine, like wheeled it through 3 wards. My reg was like, oh yeah, that's really great, but that's the echo machine. And I had to wheel it all the way back, and as I come round the corner, I see the poor cardiology reg who has taken his echo machine diligently round the ward, and then I've just come while he's seeing a patient and basically stolen it. And there were so many moments like that where I look back now, and you can laugh, and I think they are a bit of a rite of passage, but there were many moments like that. And then I guess the unknown and the risks I put up there, because I guess this was probably worse in the pandemic, which was kind of every day, just different protocols, different red areas. This is now a green area. This is you have to wear your mask here, you can't wear your mask here. All of these things were changing so quickly. And even the medications we were using, we started off, I think, with tocilizumab or something at the beginning, and then it changed overnight, and you just had to sort of be up to date with that. And it was amazing in some senses, because you felt like things were progressing towards something at least. But yeah, you just felt like, you were looking up to people who also had no idea what they were facing. And then the risks, I think, just being aware that all of your colleagues were sort of coming to work. And at this stage, it was early on, people were coming in with it young, really unwell. You didn't know, I just didn't really think about it, to be honest, that much. That's kind of how I dealt with it. But I remember when I was at work one day, and there was a nurse who'd worked for a really long time in ITU, and they sadly passed away from COVID in Chelsea and Westminster. And I remember sort of all the staff just lined up along the walkways of the hospital, and they wheeled the bed out sort of covered in flowers, and everyone was silent for a bit, and then everyone was clapping. And it was just, I remember thinking, like, wow, like, all these people who are putting patient care first, regardless, and I think it was a moment of sort of appreciation for each other more than anything else. And similarly, for patients, it was really hard. Patients were brought in, and their family weren't allowed to come in. We spent a lot of our time calling next of kins who were worried, so people's relatives who had no idea what was going on, and that became quite an important part of the job. And I think even helping an elderly patient FaceTime their family, things like that became so important. And I remember actually sort of beyond that, when relatives first started being able to come into the hospital, it was very bizarre for us because we'd never had that before. And finally, that we learnt to treat COVID very well, and actually not that much else, because there were whole months, I think, weeks at a time, my hospital, every single patient was COVID positive. And when you were on the medical take, most patients coming in, it was all COVID. And so when all the sort of classical pathologies that you'd learnt about in medical school finally started trickling in, it all felt like you were sort of going back and learning it from scratch. But yeah, and then I guess that sounded all a bit doom and gloom, so I wanted to add some things which I think, obviously it was a difficult time for everybody, but some sort of positives, I guess, that I took from it. And the first one is that I felt really privileged to be able to go to work. I think the vast majority of people stuck at home. All my friends, a lot of my friends work in creative industries, they were all working from home the whole time and just getting, cabin fever. And I think the fact that I got to go to work every day with colleagues and, colleagues really pulled together, they managed to keep the morale going. So yeah, that was, I think, I felt actually lucky at the time that I had a purpose and could leave the house every day. Working as a firm was great. It was, I have kept those friends to this day. And just when you know each other that well, because that's the team you work with every day, and when someone's having a bad day and they need a bit more support. So yeah, that was a really nice way of working, and it's not as possible now because of on-call commitments, and often now when I do an on-call I will have never necessarily met any of the team before, and yeah, so it was nice to get sort of the opportunity to work like that for a bit. Finding my feet eventually, I would say. I think you're always slightly finding your feet, but I remember definitely towards the end of F1 looking back and thinking, wow, like I've come a long way. And I think when you start on your first day, and I used to see other F1s, handing over to people on the phone, and I was like, how do they talk like that? How are they so fluent? Because I just felt like I would never be able to be that confident. But you do pick it up eventually. And I think having done that during COVID, that made it all the bigger sense of sort of progress, I think, because it just was such an unusual time to be working as part of the NHS. And then getting our first COVID jabs, I'll definitely remember that. That was exciting. I think it felt, for the first time, like there was sort of light at the end of the tunnel. And, as staff, we were some of the first people in the country to get them. And finally, it's really cringe like that, but I think it's just to say, I think I felt very proud to be working as part of the NHS at that time. And something I will remember is because before I was working there, I was obviously doing what everyone else was doing, which was, I don't know if you remember, but on Thursday you do the NHS clap. And I'm not saying claps are enough, obviously, but they are nice also. But I was always doing I was out on my doorstep, clapping with saucepans, everything. And then when I started work on the Thursday, the whole hospital would go outside, and everyone would be, in their scrubs, and nurses, doctors, occupational therapists, everybody, but socially distanced outside the hospital. And I remember the first time I went down, and all the traffic stopped, and everybody was just cheering, and then the ITU building was at the top, and they couldn't come down, obviously, because it was, they couldn't leave, but you would then clap up to where they were, and you'd see all their faces in the window, and it was just really kind of, the sense of camaraderie, I think, was amazing, and I think that's something that I will remember for a really long time. And to be honest, I will remember all of it. I think, yes, I have not been to Australia or Fiji to this day, and I would like to go at some point. I also booked my tickets with STA Travel, and then they went into administration overnight, so I didn't even get the money back. But I wouldn't change it, to be honest, in the sense of how much I learned, and I think, hopefully one day I will get to go to Australia and Fiji, but it was a really formative experience, I would say. And that's all I have.
Sit there, just in case there are questions, rather than you going down, and then we'll, now I'll see whether I can do this without completely, no, I can't do this without really completely. Just to say, I have been to Fiji on my elective, but I followed the Bethan if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. So I arrived in Fiji and a coup broke out within about 36 hours of me arriving. And so martial law was invoked, and I am the living proof that you can eat nothing but baked beans for 3.5 weeks and survive. I don't think I've eaten baked beans since. But it was an extraordinary time. And this was I don't know whether many of you remember Peggy Frith. So Peggy Frith was Director of Clinical Studies at the time when I was on elective. And I remember a very sort of scratchy phone call with her by a satellite phone. And she was like, "Are you all right?" It was an enormous source of comfort. So Fiji Yangle, it's not all that. Now, Soham has a few letters after his name. Dear God, too many. So Soham is not only a budding but an actual neurosurgeon. And we were reflecting. It's so nice that the two of you that are here are working in brain and mind, and I think that would have tickled Jane Pink, I have to say. Anyway, Sarah, over to you.
Hi there. The last time I was actually on this stage was for St Hilda's drama production, so it's quite nice to be back here for a meeting about a clinical reason, but it's really good to be back at St Hilda's. I think Bethan's already done a lot of the hard work for me, so I'm just going to represent the picture of us together. I think this was us in December 2020, when Bethan still looks as young as she did, and I had a lot more black hair, so it was a good time. And soon after that as well, I was also quite close with one of my friends from med school as well. This is Chloe Jacqueline, who's actually getting married soon, hopefully, as well as pretend married with me as part of the Oslo marriage scheme. So me and Chloe were planning our elective soon after finals. Much like Bethan, we quite enjoyed the sea. Our plans were in Cape Town in South Africa and in Trinidad and Tobago. So Cape Town is the picture with the mountains, and Trinidad and Tobago also has mountains, but a lot more of a close-up picture that you can see. My interest was in working in pediatric neurosurgery, so I wanted to go to the world-famous hospital there, Red Cross Children's Hospital in South Africa, and actually experience where pediatric neurosurgery, a lot of its formidable operations and a lot of the technological advancements have happened, especially with one of the leading experts of his time, and still his time, even though he's retiring soon, Anthony Fagaji. And at the same time, we also wanted to go to quite an austere environment in Trinidad and Tobago, where they didn't have as many resources, where they were dealing with patients under quite a difficult resource-constrained setting, lots of patients for very few doctors, something that I'd be quite familiar with very shortly, but not for a Trinidad and Tobago situation. Sadly, I never got to go, because as you can see here, we were in an ICU setting, wearing gear, much like you can see behind you, and medical schools, as Catherine's already alluded to, were completely empty, and you really couldn't do much apart from go to work or stay at home. But thankfully, between that little interim period of January and April, I also got to take part in an initiative being run by the medical school. One of 20 medical students, and I think the first in the country, we decided to volunteer to help out the NHS while still as medical students. So the 20 of us got to work in various different settings. This is me and another medical student called Elizabeth Fox, and this is just a snippet from the newsletter from the Trust about how we were working in the A&E department, the first people to meet patients coming in for a variety of reasons, including possibly COVID. Our role at that time wasn't clinical. It was essentially just to be a point of contact and a checkpoint to make sure that we weren't mixing patients, we weren't spreading COVID, and allowing people to go to the appropriate care, but also protect us, others, and the healthcare professionals first online in duty for them. So it was more of an administrative role, but I think at that point they needed every single person because they were so overburdened that they needed an extra volunteer for that administrative role. But soon after, I went from admin to becoming a doctor. This is March 2020, 26th of March. You can see when the government has officially decreed that people can be graduated early and we can go from medical students to becoming doctors. And I didn't get to go to one of the best hospitals in the country, Chelsea and Westminster. I was sorry, John Ratcliffe is also great. I went to Milton Keynes University Hospital. And I went to Milton Keynes about 5 months before I was meant to. And I also was... And I also was in the ICU department for a long time. So my first 5 months, having just done OSCEs where I got told about an arterial line and a central venous line, but actually I'd never really done one, so I was just kind of making up the steps as I was demonstrating to the examiners on how to do one. Never thought I'd ever need to. I thought, I was going into surgery, I knew I wanted to do surgery, these were not procedures I'd ever need to do. An ultrasound cannulation, that's not really in my skill set or ever going to be in my skill set. Putting an ultrasound to someone's jugular vein, never having done anything in that before, not in my skill set. I never really need to think about that. In the 5 months that I was here, I think I learned everything that an F1 and F2 is expected to, but also that you need to for an ICU setting. They didn't have enough hands for the patients that they had with COVID. Milton Keynes University Hospital before COVID had about 6 beds for ICU patients. When I was there, they had about 4 wards full of people who needed high dependency care. Same staffing levels as they had before I came. They had to train everyone to do everything in a really short amount of time. Can you imagine someone coming straight from university, putting a line into someone's neck? It was really daunting and really scary. But the great thing is, in that 5-month period, back in the day, not back in the day, it's only a few years ago, but there was a checklist that all foundation doctors had to do to complete their foundational training. In that 5-month period, I completed everything before I'd even started foundational training, because that's how intense that period was. So the great... Sorry.
You won't be invited back.
I won't. Yeah. So the great thing about that was when it came to foundational training, I'd already pretty much done everything that I needed to do, and I could focus on other things. So going back onto my initial interest for going on elective to South Africa and Trinidad and Tobago, it was all based on universal healthcare, really. So I got back in touch with people in South Africa and Trinidad and Tobago during F1 and F2. I got back in touch with Anthony Fagaji, and I'm going to his hospital in December as a little bit of an observership just to see what he's currently up to. I went to Trinidad and Tobago not as an observership, but more as a holiday with my fiancée recently. So I have been able to do everything that I want to do, and I've been able to continue doing what I want to do, and I think I got a lot of the skills that I did want to get out of foundational training a lot earlier on because of the crisis that happened. The sad thing about it is that there was a lot of disability and a lot of death for a lot of my patients. And I remember an early statement by Henry Marsh when I was applying for neurosurgery being, as a neurosurgeon, you've got your own graveyard to deal with. And that graveyard is probably in the hundreds over the course of your career. Over my 2 years as a foundational trainee and an interim F1 doctor, I probably got just that many from COVID itself. The number of conversations I probably had with families about someone passing away is too many for my career already. One thing it has really helped with is my career going forward. I'm quite aware as a neurosurgeon now how frail life is and how important it is to have those conversations and actually talk to people really early on about mortality, morbidity, and put people really at the forefront of my care. It's not the surgery that matters, it's really the people, and I thank the interim F1 period for that. Thank you very much. I'm just going to fix your things while I'm...
Just fix your things below, just do it under the lecture. Does anybody have any questions for Soam or Bethan about what it was like to be an interim F1? Or should we move on to the... There are some questions here. There's some questions. Who's got mics? Gribin, leap into action. There he goes. Twinkle toes. Don't mind. At that.
So obviously what you were speaking about is really intense, and because we're going to go on the same journey as you, do you think after COVID would it be just as intense for us or less intense for us?
Sure. So I think the intensity is much different. One thing that's definitely better is I was supervising an F2 before in terms of breaking bad news, and they told me they've never had to before. So this is 2 years into being a doctor, they've never had to have a conversation with a family. That's because they've never experienced it. So great thing is they've never experienced it, which is something I would never be able to say. But in terms of the intensity with the NHS workload, I think you've probably read in the newspaper, we've got increasing patients in the waiting list. We've got a lot of operations still to do, and the workforce crisis isn't getting any better. So no in terms of the illnesses and no in terms of the disease that you see, but there are other pressures now on you that will still be on the rest of us.
It's not all bad though. Yeah, no, I would say, you know, no one's going to sugarcoat it. I think everybody knows that the NHS has been under massive pressure for a very long time. I think there was a lot of talk around about COVID time of people saying, oh, you know, but I used to find it strange when they'd say, we're preventing the NHS reaching capacity. And obviously, the NHS has been at capacity really for years. But I wouldn't say that my working life now is the same as when it was COVID. Things have settled a bit more. I think more, because with COVID it was the pressures, but it was also the unknown. Nobody knew where it was going, how bad it was going to get. It was very day by day. And although, you know, the staffing pressures and the capacity pressures are still there, that side of the more sort of scary side isn't there as much. So don't be all put off.
It's not doomsday yet. Luke, there was another question down here.
You've almost answered one of my questions, but as medical students, before you were precipitated into working, how much training were you given about breaking bad news, talking to relatives, communicating? Was that something that equipped you for the unexpected or not?
I think actually it's something that's done really well here. I think we did a lot of sort of role play sessions. It came up and, you know, you had to prep it for OSCEs quite a few times. So I think it is something that you had a lot of practice in. I would say it's always different the first time you're doing it in real life. And I would say the biggest part of that is because actually it's how you feel as well. When you're doing it and it's an actor or it's in an exam, you have no emotional connection to that person. But actually, when it is, you know, you're talking about a patient you know or a family that you've been involved with as their doctor, then that is, I think it's managing your own emotions as well. And at that time, it was, you know, coming thick and fast. Like, I think I remember on one of my F1 nights, I certified 8 deaths in a night just from COVID, and it wasn't that big a hospital. So you became very good at it very quickly.
Well, then there's a follow-up question to that, if I may, and that's, you talked about the camaraderie as a firm, and I detected a feeling of isolation when you don't have that firm around you. Any observations and recommendations you might make on how that could be addressed?
Yeah.
So in neurosurgery, we're still in the firm-based system, which is very lucky in terms of the speciality I'm in. There are obviously clear advantages to it, as you've heard, but I think having also done a lot of my work in Oxford as a F1, F2, I can see the benefits of not being in a firm from time to time in terms of you have different consultants overseeing you, so you learn about different ways to practice medicine, and you don't learn there's only one way to do one thing. You see you see more people, so you get to work with different SHOs, work with different F1s, you get to know the hospital a bit more, and I think as an F2 I pretty much got to know all the other F2s in the hospital because I wasn't in a firm-based structure, which wasn't the case in F1 or in my current training program. So I think there are benefits, and I wouldn't advocate for one another across the system. I think it's really person dependent for what works better for them.
There's another one over here, actually.
Thank you for the presentations. You may not be directly involved, but many of your colleagues are on strike, and so are your senior colleagues. And having gone through your tough period of COVID and struggling with all that workload and deaths and so on, and the clapping every sort of Thursday evenings, how do you feel nowadays, some sort of with society, some sort of regard for clinical work and now going on strike and so on?
Yeah, I think it's. I won't want to get too political, but so I will. Yeah, I will refrain.
Only your opinion, just to.
Yeah, I think something that I personally found really hard was it did, and it's not to say that this is the public's a true reflection of people's opinions, but during COVID, you know, as much as the work was incredibly tough, we got free Ubers. All the companies were giving free food. We would have. You know, everyone was clapping on a Thursday, and it really felt actually for the first time, because nothing had changed for us in the sense NHS staff were still just going to work and doing their job as they have done for years and years and years, and that hadn't changed, but it suddenly felt, I think you felt seen for the first time by the general public, and I think it was slightly difficult, I think, when it felt that I think there is still a lot of support behind doctors, and I think that COVID has changed that for NHS staff in general. But I think there is the sense of actually, at the end of the day, you know, a clap is nice, but I think doctors are, especially with the cost of living crisis, I think things have changed in recent years, and I think the biggest misconception, I think, is that, you know, the public think, oh, junior doctors, they're wanting more money, they're greedy. Actually, the fact of the matter is that and I've had this so many times, is that now the expectation when you go to work an on-call shift is that the other person who's meant to be there won't be, because they're, you know, off sick, or they've left and the post hasn't been filled. And so you're often doing the workload of sort of two people as one person. And I think that's the issue, is that we're in a bit of a retention crisis, and that is where, you know, I think junior doctors are saying, look, it's not safe anymore, and we want, I think it's not solely about money at all, it's just that I think they want to feel heard and want recognition, and I think COVID kind of has actually been a catalyst for that in a way, and I think it's given people, you know, the chance to stand up and be like, look, you know, you can't stand there 1 minute and then sort of go back on how you feel, and I do hope that, you know, things are going to change a bit over the next few years. So yeah, we'll see.
Conflict of interest and part of the BMA Council.
Does that mean you do or don't want to speak?
That's okay. I think Bethan's there.
There was another question over here, Lou. Okay.
Hi. So this is more like informal. So how many years did you spend on your education to like reach the position who you are in right now? So would you mind like giving us an overview right from medical school?
So as in how many years since medical school to get to where we are now?
Yes.
So we did 6 years at medical school, didn't we? 6, lovely, enjoyable years. And then I did F1 and F2, same as you. And then some people, it depends then, a lot of people take what's called an F3 year, where they have time out to pursue their own interests, travel. I didn't do an F3, I actually went straight into training, so then I did my CT1 year, and now I'm sort of CT2, but I'm taking actually a 6-month out of placement. I'm the equivalent of CT2, so core trainee, sorry. Core trainee, which is basically a trainee in a specific specialty. And psychiatry training is 7 years, 6 or 7 years. So I'd be like 2nd year out of that. yours will be longer than mine.
Yeah, I've kind of done a special path, so I've gone down an academic and clinical pathway. So after the 6 years, I think Bethan also did a special path. You did the psychiatry fellowship program, didn't you?
Yeah, but that didn't change the amount of time.
Did it not? Okay, yeah. So I had to take a split of my clinical and academic time. So initially I had a 25% academic split and a 75% clinical, which explains some of the post-nominals that you can see as I decided to do some degrees whilst I was doing my academic time. And then I went straight into specialist training. So I went from Foundation Year 1 to Foundation Year 2 to specialist training in neurosurgery. So I didn't do the core training per se, and I've continued on that. Yeah.
Thank you. So your CCT, when will you complete training?
Probably when Bethan's retiring.
Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
Why neurosurgery?
I think we had a lot of people in this college who were very passionate about the brain and the mind. I think a big tutor, I don't know if a lot of you have met her, was Micah Glitch here, and she was really passionate about that. And I was probably in that study that you were hearing. Me and Bethan were probably with that Cal Lab study where we looked at neuroanatomy, and I actually really did enjoy the Cal Lab. So I think being exposed to such great neuroscientists, neurosurgeons and neuroanatomists at Oxford really drove my attention towards the brain.
Would you consider any other type of surgery?
Probably not at this stage of my life.
Well, we can have a video. I don't mind because we've only got about 6 minutes till tea. Audrona, what should we do?
How long does it take?
I don't know. There's 4 of them, I think. It's about 15 minutes, but they've got. I mean, maybe we leave it and share it with them. Maybe. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I think what we'll do. The only other thing I wanted to say was to advertise, as it were, the students lower down in the academic years who also contributed during COVID. So obviously the students who were in final year couldn't graduate early, that would have been way too early. But they were absolutely extraordinary in what they did, and their imagination was amazing. So we had a whole bunch of students who knew themselves very well and said, you know what, I can't actually do swabbing or proning patients in ITU, I'm going to find that too top end. But I've got a clean driving licence, I will drive ventilators across the country. So just whole armies of students driving ventilators up and down the M1 and across into Wales and wherever else the kit was needed. The 5th years were amazing and produced a babysitting app for the John Radcliffe, because they were all DBS checked, they were all Criminal Record Bureau checked, they'd all done paediatrics, and they said, right, we know nurseries are closed, all the schools are closed, we will babysit your children for free, and kept the NHS working, which was absolutely extraordinary. There were also 2 groups who did video diaries on SCABU and neonatal intensive care, so mothers who'd given birth and partners could actually have a daily update. I think it was 3 times a day. They did a little video update and could send that to them. And there was also a group who really were pretty tough, who did end-of-life FaceTiming, as I think you alluded to it, when there was no real treatment, before there was talk, before there was anything really, and would FaceTime and literally hold the FaceTime so that people had company while they died. And those were my students, and the product of your history, which is just so fabulous. We haven't had a chance to do the elective thing because this was perhaps more. Should we do 1 or 2? Okay, we'll do 1 or 2. That's fine. If you can get the tech to work. Yes. That's fine.
Good, yeah.
You come down. We'll do 1 or 2, but I won't keep you from tea.
Hello. Well done, everybody.
Shall I do it, Elaine? I'm really good at shouting at people.
Hello, can we have your attention?
There we go.
3 voices. Okay, I'm very pleased to have seen people filling in forms and reading the homework, or the aside work. And we come on to this final session of the formal programme of the conference, and then after this we'll move over to the dining room area for the tributes. And if you haven't seen it, there's a presentation of some tributes on the left as you go out of the doors here that you might want to have a look at. I know a lot of people have looked at them already. So it's my pleasure now to introduce, I know Catherine's introduced herself, but I just wanted to set out where Charlotte and Catherine belong. So Charlotte, who's standing here, Charlotte Stagg, is a professor. She's, as well as Director of Studies for Preclinical Medicine in the university, she heads the Physiology Neuroimaging Group, another brain link, and she researches into how the brain adapts to new challenges, such as learning new motor skills and functional recovery after stroke. It's interesting how many of our talks today have sort of melded with each other or had relationships with the other talks. And then Catherine here, Dr. Catherine Swales, is the Fellow of Clinical Medicine at St Hilda's and Director of Clinical Studies in the university for the medical school. And clinically, she has a lectureship in rheumatology. And one of her special focus is helping students to foster and maintain research interest, linking with what Dr. Sverko was saying. So thank you very much. We've all been looking forward to this, and the students have stayed back in order to hear you.
Thank you, and it's a real pleasure to be talking. I know that some of the students have to go, and that's completely fine. We won't take it personally. Thank you so much for being here and asking brilliant questions. It's been absolutely fantastic, so thank you, and I hope you've learned something from the day. One of the things one gets used to at Oxford is the history of the place and standing on the shoulders of giants. One of the challenges of my job, so I'm just going into my third year, is that I have a lot to live up to. So I never met Dr. Mellanby. I wish I had, though she sounds somewhat terrifying. She sounds absolutely incredible and has given me currently a really privileged position, right? We have an amazing history, and the thing that I've taken from today and from the variety of the talks is what an incredible bunch of alumni we have, right? From our fantastic finalists who went to be foundation year doctors up to professors at Cambridge. Not Oxford, but Cambridge. So it's a real legacy, and we do take very seriously the responsibility of living up to that and training our next generation of doctors. So it was difficult to sort of know exactly where to start with this. So I think both Catherine and I are going to keep it quite short, and we're very, very happy to take questions at the end. But one thing that struck me actually thinking about this and then from today is that some things really haven't changed, right? We teach much the same stuff, and we teach it in very much the same way. I think my tutorials are probably not quite as intimidating as Dr. Mellanby's, but you can ask my students later. But we care about engagement, we care about thought, we care about going back to the original research, we care about those discussions. So a lot of the course has not really altered, I suspect, and how we teach it has not really altered. What will have changed, I think, is the applications procedure, which is why I gave you some homework. But some of you, particularly our A-level students, will be or will become very quickly familiar with the BMAT. But for those of you who haven't, the best way of finding out what admissions tests are like is to have a go. So I hope you enjoyed the challenge. So I'll give you a flavour of what the application process is like and sort of what we're doing, and then hand over to Catherine to talk more about the clinical school. So one of the real pushes over the last, certainly since I've been teaching at Oxford, so 15 years or so, is to really try and level the playing field for applicants. We absolutely care about getting the brightest and the best, and we really don't care about pretty much anything else, okay? So what we're trying to do is make sure that if you know Oxford well and both your parents are professors here, or none of your family have been to university, you are at the same place when it comes to admissions and you stand the same chances of success based on your abilities. So we're a medical school of about 150 students on the traditional 6-year course per year. We get about 1,700 applicants. These were the numbers from last year, of whom most sit the BMAT, and you're familiar with that. And so we are ending up with somewhere around 10 applicants for each place. Some of the people don't manage to sit the BMAT, some of them are too young. We require people to be 18 in their first term, and various other requirements. And some people clearly decide that it's not quite for them early on. But we shortlist really objectively, and we can discuss whether this is how we should do it or not, but it is objective. So we score on the BMAT, and on GCSE passes at grade 8 or 9, so that's the A** A level, for those of you who are not quite familiar with the new numbering system. If people have them, not everybody has GCSEs. And particularly, we've heard the long tail of COVID over the last few years. You'll be very aware that the school examination systems have been very disrupted. So the GCSEs have not been a useful, indeed not used, criterion. We score on the BMAT. Why do we do that? What is it? Well, it's a test that we think tests the kind of things we think are really important for being an undergraduate medic at Oxford and some other places. There's a little bit of knowledge, but not much. It's mostly critical thinking. We really want people to be able to work through problems. We want them to be able to apply their knowledge, and we want them to be able to write. So there is a writing task that looks very much like an essay. And we really do look at these, and we take it very, very seriously. The BMAT is currently, it is actually going to be stopping very soon, so watch this space. But it is an international exam. You can sit it in examination centres around the world. And it's then computer marked. It is a multiple choice, as are many, many medical examinations nowadays. Certainly all my postgraduate exams were, and very many of our undergraduate exams are MCQs and essay-based. So it matches how we examine our students. The questions I gave you were genuine practice questions. And I have heard some debates. I completely understand. I'm not about to defend whether these are the right answers or the wrong answers. I'm merely going to say these are the answers that would have got you a mark. These were all from Part A, which is the thinking skills section. Wasn't going to try and get you to remember your GCSE biology. And my daughter has just done her 11 plus, actually, so I spent a lot of the summer arguing about what the right answer was to a multiple choice question and whether the examiners were right. So as I reveal the answers, I will say to you, please feel free to maintain an intellectual superiority if you disagree with the examiners. We are encouraging thought here, but these are the answers. These are the answers that would have got you the mark, which may or may not be right. It's question 1E.
I need to look at my question.
Which of the following best expresses the main conclusion of the above arguments?
Okay.
There's going to be a lot of chatter about this. Best expresses the main conclusion. Okay. The government's idea of giving married couples tax breaks is flawed. You could, of course, absolutely disagree with the premise of the question, and that is also fine. E will get you a mark. Okay. I'm not going to ask people whether they got it. You can maintain a personal sense of satisfaction. The question on shooting, also E. Yeah. A more mathsy one. There's a logic in there somewhere. I personally was warming to this one. I thought, I'm quite logical, I can do this, and it took me a very long time, and I did not get it right. D.
Oh, I wouldn't have got that right.
Mike gets the award. And finally, the fun one, if there can be such a thing. The time at Carlisle should be 3 o'clock. That does assume we're not in the middle of a train strike. and there were no replacement bus services.
I would have gotten them all wrong.
So,
I'm just going to write. Can I write the answers down?
so you do not have to get 100%. This is one part of 3 sections. The shortlisting, we shortlist depending on the BMAT and contextualised GCSEs. It's difficult. The average score that would have got you an interview is somewhere around 75%. Okay? So if you got 1 wrong, you're probably all right. If you got 2 wrong, very sorry, we'll have those degrees back. No. I think it's difficult, right? I think we're putting our students through a lot. All questions related to the equality or otherwise of the questions should go to the BMAT people, not me. No, I mean, I think, I think they're hard. I think they're hard if you're a grown adult who thinks that they probably should be here. I think being 17 and trying to do this, I think we expect a lot from our students. I don't think that's changed. I don't think we expect any more from them than we did before the BMAT. I think it's much more objectively quantifiable how good these kids have to be.
That's a whole different way of shortlisting and things, and it's probably more appropriate to the way kids are taught these days.
Yep. So we do still, we hope it's more objective, and it's not knowledge-based. So we're not, the theory would be that you can't be taught the answers to this. Obviously, you can prepare for it, but we're trying to get at critical thinking and application. Yeah, absolutely. These are skills that we hope, I'm looking at my undergrads, that we hope that you use in every tutorial, right? We give you some information, what are you going to do with it? So
Can I just interrupt? Could people hear the questions?
Oh, sorry.
Maybe if you could just repeat the questions, that'd be great.
Sorry, yes. So there was some discussion about whether this is what students are sort of more taught now, and I defer to our current crop. I think this fits in line with some of the ways that that we teach our school children now, and it is absolutely the skills that we're hoping. Was the other part of the question we are hoping to have in our tutorials. So I think it's I think there are good things with it, and about a quarter-ish of the applicants are shortlisted for interview. We do go through every application, so it's not just the computer says no. Everybody that does not get shortlisted automatically, we go through their applications and we make sure we're not missing something, right? So it's, they all get looked at, but we hope that this is an objective way of shortlisting and we think it works well. Interviews, and I'd be very interested, I certainly don't give anyone a mole, but we do all kinds of things. So big changes, so interviews are now online, and we can debate whether that's a good thing or not. Opinion is divided even in the university. But all medical school interviews, at least at the moment, are conducted via Teams. It's a level playing field. They don't get to come here. We can debate that. And we have tried very hard, again, to widen access and to not require our students to have a working knowledge of the Oxford College system. So people will apply to a college, but they will get interviewed at another college that is centrally chosen. So even if you do choose one, you may well end up another, and actually about 35% of people, so about a third of people will end up in a college they did not apply to. So it's much less college specific than I think it was back in the day. And everybody will be interviewed by at least one practicing clinician. If you're lucky enough to have interviews here, you'll get interviewed by 2. But we think that's massively important. And it is a sort of required, and they have a veto. I don't think we've vetoed anyone for years, but technically they can. And it's we are interested in scientific ability, we're interested in pure academia, but we're interested in, yes, fine, but after those 3 years, these people are going to go and be doctors. Can we at least try and assess that as well? And it's the combination of those skills that we're really looking for. And I imagine the interviews haven't changed very much. We're interested. This is the university website criteria. We're interested in problem solving, critical thinking. We care about how you think. You don't need to know the answers, but we care about how you might get there, right? We care about whether you're interested. There's not a lot of point and not a lot of fun for anybody coming to spend 6 years at Oxford if you don't like the science. Okay, it's not going to be great.
Or people, yeah.
Yeah. So, we really want you to go back to the original research. We want that kind of mind that asks the questions, because those are the people that make great doctors, right? You don't just take the information, you dissect it and work it out. And we care about whether you can tell people stuff. It's all very well understanding it, but being a doctor is all about communicating, whatever that might be. Okay? So that's the academic potential. We are looking at suitability for medicine. Now, we are, and I think we would probably all agree that these are things that we would hope our doctors have. We are looking for people who are empathetic, who are motivated, not just for 6 years of really quite hard work, but a career that's not going to be easy. Again, that they can communicate not just the scientific facts, but they can break bad news, they can elicit difficult histories, that they're honest, that they are going to be vaguely aware of the ethics around all of this, that they're team players, this is not a solo sport, and that they are, they are aware and thinking about the commitment they're making in terms of their careers. So we've written it down, and it's on the website, but I think those probably haven't changed. I think they probably won't. I think we're looking for those kind of, that is where we aim our interview questions. That's what we're trying to get at in our interviews. So we offer about 10% of applicants. And, oh yes, 68%, the adjusted BMAT, they were. I was a little bit higher in recollection. So it does matter, there are lots of other factors, and people with lower BMATs than that do get in. It is not an absolute criteria, but that's sort of roughly where we're looking at. And as I say, about a third, just over, of offers are made to a college that people didn't apply to. And because that is, our interviews are done online, that may well be a college they've never visited. I think changes the relationship at the application stage, at least. We do make sure they come and see us. So they have come, they have seen the college, they've met the other students on the course before they start. But I think it does change the decision process slightly. And we are in line with many other medical schools around the country who are asking 3 A-levels. We ask for A-star AA, including chemistry and another science. So fairly standard. And what do they do? Well, again, I think this will look pretty familiar. The first year, they do BM Part 1, so that's anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, genetics. And then the first 2 terms of the second year is neuroscience, immunology, applied pathology, sociology. And then the last 4 terms is the final honours school, where people get a lot more choice as to what they want to do. And they can choose a number of options within the medical school to pursue for an honours degree. The list is evolving and changing, but as a neuroscientist and in this room, I am delighted to say there are many neuroscience options one can choose. You can choose pharmacology, cardiovascular science, pathology, infection, immunity, endocrinology. So the breadth of medical schools. So people really do get to choose what they would like to do. These do change slightly as the students. You could also, we require people to sit a paper in their chosen stream. We also require them to do a research project in the lab and write an extended essay supervised by somebody within biomedical sciences in Oxford. And that's 3,000 words on a topic of their choice. It can often be a critical analysis or meta-analysis. And the research projects should be, and I am an academic, I believe very strongly that our students should do proper research. I believe very strongly that all doctors should know how to conduct a research project. We've heard quite convincingly why that should be true. Earlier, I think even if you're never going to do academia again, right, it is massively important that you understand where scientific findings come from what the scientific method is, what the pitfalls are in that, what the biases are in that, and you learn to critically appraise the literature, because that, even as a non-academic, every clinician needs to be able to do that. And a lot of our clinicians become academics as well. We are a very academic medical school. We produce a lot of clinical academics, and I think we should. And so we take the research project very, very seriously. Our students spend the equivalent of 8 weeks full-time in the lab, doing the experiments, and then the rest of the year writing them up. And if you talk to them, you'll discover they're often, actually longer than that. People get very involved in them. They sometimes lead to PhDs, to DPhils. People will take some time out to do that. And they really are across the breadth of medical school. I did a quick search back through the ones I've been asked to read over the last couple of years, so some of the titles. And I'm just, as always, struck by the breadth of these. So we've had chondrocytes, so we have Catherine and Philippa, who is our biomedical tutor, both interested in joints and rheumatology. So we have that aspect of things, but we have fatty acid receptors, we have some viruses, we have the kind of thing that I do around brain stimulation and neuroscience, and very applied clinical research. So the breadth is extraordinary. And these days, many of these projects will go on to form at least part of published research. So our students are not only hopefully getting a real insight into how labs work, but this is real science that's making a difference to the literature. So it is a really important part of their preclinical work, and something that, I'm certainly very passionate about, and I try and encourage them to take very seriously. And then my work really is done after that. They sit their finals, they do very well because they're brilliant and they work hard. And then they go on to clinical school. So I shall hand over to Catherine, who will tell you what happens at that mysterious point from then on in.
Super. Thank you very much. Lovely to see you all again. And students, I do recognise the slight embarrassment of having to walk out in the middle of somebody's talk, but please don't, just when you have to go, thank you so much for coming, do feel free. So it's our day. I'm going to talk more broadly than about Hilda's. I'm going to talk about actually the national picture of medical education. I am going to frame it in Oxford, because many of you come from this home base and you might want to know what things have changed locally. But I am going to give you more of a national picture as well, because goodness me, the landscape is changing under our feet at a dizzying rate. I'll talk into the microphone. I thought my voice was loud enough. So this is unashamedly an update from the School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences, because this is probably one of the newest changes. As of the 1st of August, the different clinical, preclinical, graduate entry medicine courses and biomedical sciences have merged to effectively become a department. So from the 1st of August, we have divorced from the Medical Sciences Divisional Office and become, in the university organogram, equivalent to a department, which is a hugely valuable step forward in terms of governance, financial considerations, opportunity for recruiting and retraining staff, etc., etc. And quite deliberately, we are keeping biomedical sciences with us. We will never be a department because we work across every department in the Medical Sciences Division, whether it's in the science park down the road or up in the clinical academic parts in Headington. We are a school, not a department, but we have the same clout now as the others that have been prior established. So I speak on behalf of not one course, but 4 courses: preclinical medicine, clinical medicine, graduate entry medicine, and biomedical sciences course. I'm going to touch on each of these, but do please, as we go along, interrupt or ask or go, what happened to physiology? You might have wondered what happened to physiology. It became the BA in medical sciences, if you were just wondering what happened at that point. But do please interrupt me. But this is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about really how things stand more or less locally, changes in terms of student support, student endeavour with our MB DPhil programme, and then faculty support in terms of the MSc in medical education, and then touch briefly on aspirations and where we go next. So who are we? Well, I won't dwell on this, but we are as you knew us. We are old and old-fashioned, I think it's fair to say. We are still broadly 3 plus 3 years. 3 years of preclinical science and then 3 years of clinical. The graduate entry medicine program that admits between 35 and 38 students per year who have done a previous science degree has a sort of 1 year and 3 year split, roughly. So the graduate entry medics do seriously, it's a boot camp for their first preclinical year, and then essentially I inherit them, if you like, and the clinical training is the same. The collegiate system remains, of course, for admissions and preclinical. We are small and precious for our smallness. It's part of our USP. I'm not brilliant at names, but I am very good with faces, and I do recognise most of our students, and I think it's not that, it's that if a student comes in distress or in aspiration or burnout, we can flex the course. If somebody comes and says, actually, I want to take a year out doing lay ministry in the south of France, that's okay by me. It genuinely is. You must feel free to place other things within your course. Do you want to do a DPhil? That's also okay. So we are able, because we are a small cohort, to flex the course and make things specific for the students sitting in front of us. We are also resisting increases I'll come on to at the end because we haven't got much space. The college, I know, has a lot of new buildings, and goodness me, aren't they beautiful. But if we are going to accommodate all of our new students for the first year, you know, colleges need to have places to put these students, and actually colleges are somewhat bursting at the seams. We also don't have big lecture theatres that can house 500 students, etc. So capital infrastructure is a problem. We're science heavy, unashamedly so. Really, it's part of our USP. But we are supportive in clinically as well as preclinically, very, very visible senior teaching staff. We run on a first name basis. Our doors are metaphorically and literally open, and the students, I think, know that. They're nodding. We are also reliant on and very grateful to our LEPs, local education providers, artists formerly known as district general hospitals. The new nomenclature is LEP because it was felt more from us than our LEPs that district general hospital sounded a little bit not quite the John Radcliffe, is it? Milton Keynes, for example, so they are our local education providers. We are the teaching centre for the Thames Valley. It's not just Oxford and then you get sent to Slough or Swindon. You are part of the Thames Valley programme. So new people and posts within the medical school, within the clinical school section of the school. We now have 2 directors of undergraduate medical education. So we have equivalents of me who work on the trust side of things, with whom I can work to make sure that the clinical placements are as I hope and expect that they might be. There will be inequalities in student experience across a very, very large footprint, and I work with our DOOMs, as unfortunately the acronym comes out. I work with our DOOMs to make sure that the quality assurance remains in place. We also have 3 new leads, one who leads on equality, diversity and inclusivity across the entire 6-year course, ditto public and patient involvement, and crucially sustainable healthcare, because we are in the face of a climate health crisis. Because the curriculum has become much, much more complex, we've also made appointments in curriculum leads and assessment leads for individual years, so that they can help me have a sort of broad sense of how the curriculum is going on. And the curriculum has changed. We had Brexit, not that we got to vote on it, but it's in the form of the medical licensing assessment. Has anybody heard of the medical license? Anybody who's, well, you lot have, the students have. Anybody who's trained medic heard of the medical licensing assessment? Lawrence, you've heard of it. You're looking deeply sceptical about the whole. You've heard. So the medical license, this is a GMC mandate. And it was a mandate. We were done to in this respect. The GMC became concerned about a perception of, even if there wasn't necessarily evidence for, disparity between different medical schools. And what they wanted to do, as is in the States, have a licensing examination that every single graduate would sit. So all medical students will sit the medical licensing assessment. Now, the questions are written by the Medical Schools Assessment Alliance, to which we contribute. There's a huge bank of questions. Oxford contributes, UCL, Leicester, Nottingham, we all contribute to these questions. And the papers that students will sit are drawn from that bank. So on one level, it's comforting because we are the authors as we ever were. However, we don't create the papers, and crucially, from January 24, we won't set the pass mark either. So there has been a loss of autonomy. A rather interesting moment was reached early on in the conversations where somebody quite appropriately put up their hand and said, can I just check, if they pass our finals but fail the licensing exam, what happens then? Or conversely, even worse, they fail finals, but the GMC says they're good to go. So that sent the lawyers scuttling in all sorts of directions, and the ultimate output of that discussion is that every medical school in the country has now taken this as their written paper for their finals and has got rid of their own finals papers. Okay. The Vice-Chancellor at the time had a major problem with lack of academic autonomy, and I can see the argument about autonomy. Legally it was too difficult, and I think medical schools across the country just said, we can't do it. There's also an element of assessment burden. You know, final year has a lot of stuff in it, and to do finals and the clinical exam and then this one, and stepping into uncertainty about what would happen to you if you failed one or other, we just felt wasn't fair. So the medical licensing assessment, and goodness me, what has it done to us all? Well, it's very interesting if you look at the medical licensing assessment papers. The curricula are basically our curricula. I will talk about that in a minute. But the focus of the medical licensing assessment is actually more towards primary care presentations than secondary care. You can argue the toss about that, but it is worth noting that 90% of consultations happening in the United Kingdom day in, day out occur in primary care. That is the iceberg beneath the little tip where most of the teaching historically has been done. And I think there is some national work to sort of upend that. What have we done locally? So we get the MLA curriculum, and what we have done is we've gone, right, here is the two curricula. There's the MLA curriculum, which the exam will be based on, and the Oxford curriculum. From that, we have generated 3 columns. The biggest column is, it's in the MLA and in our curriculum. Phew, nothing to do, marvellous. Then there is it's in the MLA, but not in the Oxford curriculum. Dang. So suddenly we've got to add stuff in that we never taught. In my own subject, for example, I never used to teach fibromyalgia and chronic pain. It wasn't part of my curriculum. I stuck to the inflammology bit of it. I've now got to put it in because it's in the MLA. Then there's the final column where it's in the Oxford curriculum, but not in the MLA. Now, do we insist that students get taught on something that they will not be assessed on? We know what students will do with that. That's the tricky column. That is the tricky column. It's easier in year 5, which is the subspeciality year, because there's a progression exam at the end of that year. So we still have control over. So we can insist that they learn elements of that. But that is difficult, that the MLA has pruned back bits of the curriculum. So that's been a challenge, I think, for the faculty at the school. We've got a trial in Year 5, Graduate Entry 3, of Curriculum X, which is a massive and mobile Excel spreadsheet. It's a bit more glamorous than that, where a student might be able to search, I don't know, acne vulgaris, and they would be able to see at what point it's going to be taught, where they might see patients, and what the learning outcomes associated with it might be. It's clunky, but I think we will get there and will be hugely helpful for students. I have a slight concern that it's reductive, actually, and doesn't see the totality and the messiness of patients. But interestingly, moves we've made in Year 5 to introduce that interdisciplinarity has been very difficult for students. We used to just examine, you would say, you are now doing women's health. That is your women's health, rotation. Now you're doing rheumatology, that is your... But to do an OSCE station where a woman is trying to conceive but has resistant rheumatoid and is on methotrexate and that's a teratogenic, what do we do in that situation does cause them some problems. I think you probably wouldn't enjoy that station, would you, Luke? But that's what patients are like, right? So anyway, I think there's this balance between reductionism and clarity for the students and not understanding the messiness of humanity. But the platform hopefully will help us with that. And we are making great strides, we hope, in EDI and sustainable healthcare. using our LEPs a lot more, sending students out to Slough and so on and so forth has really helped with our diversity. One place we really need to work on our diversity is our actors in OSCEs. They tend really to be white Anglo-Saxon Protestant men and women of retirement age, and that is not the only cohort that they will see, and we really, really need to work on that. Assessment, still the MLA. So for finals 24-25, so finals paper in January, the MLA AKT, Applied Knowledge Test, will replace our old MCQ paper completely. We're doing pilot papers between now and then, so the MLA team have produced papers that you can use, and we've used them for the last couple of years, but set our own pass threshold. And just to reassure the students at the back of the room, last year when we set our MLA paper, we put the pass mark for the paper at 67%, the MLA pass mark was 55%. So that just gives you a sense of where Oxford pitches itself against the medical licensing assessment. The new OSCE, we don't have to develop a new OSCE, mercifully. I think the GMC tried to do this like they do, like the Royal Colleges do for membership. Turned out to be far too difficult. The clinical exam remains in play, it's just the GMC have got to approve it, which requires quite a lot of work around EDI, actor training, and so on and so forth. The earlier years are expanding with their clinical, but the written papers are unchanged. COVID did give us some time to improve some of our online provision, and we've now spent quite a lot of time, and I need to give credit to Dr. Lois Brand and Professor Kate Saunders for working very hard on this, amongst a number of our GP colleagues, and our students who were involved, not least in the artwork, ladies and gentlemen, of our student wellbeing resources. This does not in any way eject the personal touch or being able to see Lois if you're in crisis, or me, or any of the other faculty, but it is just there to help students, sources of additional support, resources, and so on and so forth. So were you to click on the sleep section, there would be an area on reassuring people, students, that sleep disturbance while training is not uncommon, you are not odd, you are not failing, and these are the ways that you might approach difficulties with sleep. I particularly like the dormouse fat. So Romans suggested slathering your feet in dormouse fat if you were an insomniac. Perhaps one not to continue, but anyway. From an academic perspective, so that's student support from an academic perspective, we've never had an MBD fill programme at Oxford. I know that our Regis is agnostic about them, but Cambridge have always had one, UCL had one. I actually chose not to. I did my preclinical in UCL and then didn't do the MBD fill at UCL. I did an intercalated PhD. I decided not to try to merge them. And then I could come here for clinical, which was great. But we now have an MBD fill programme, so we have 8 fully funded places per year for students after either FHS or after year 4 to do a DPhil either in cancer, so Cancer Research UK, so essentially any form of cell biology, and also anything to do with inflammology, funded by the Kennedy Research Trust. And Lucy, in fact, is on that programme. Would you like to give us a little wave? So proving she survived. Did you get the patient sample? No. Dang! Oh, the joys of clinical research. But anyway, we run the MBD fill programme fully funded with a stipend, with all consumables and so on and so forth, and that is going from strength to strength. From a faculty perspective, we have also set up the MSc in medical education. So this is one of the first, I think it might only be the second, cross-divisional masters. So this is the Medical Sciences Division joining up with the Social Sciences Division, the Department of Education in particular, to create an MSc in medical education to really sort of improve our R&D, if you like, output from the medical school. UCL Medical School is ref returnable on its medical school alone. That's really embarrassing. We need to pull up our socks and try to catch up. And what are our aspirations? Well, as I say, we are now a department, which sounds better than a level 2 entity, which is the more legal term for it, but we're now essentially a department. And not because of this, but anyway, working on generating a new building. So the preclinical has the Medical Sciences Teaching Centre. The clinical has nada, nothing. What do we have? Tinchwick Hall? which sort of smells of beer and badminton. It's a bit of a strange, it's like an old school large hall, isn't it? I mean, it's not very sophisticated. So I am working with Bidwells and Associated Architects to produce a new building for clinical training, which will hopefully shore up our capital infrastructure for the next, well, not decade, 2 decades and more. From an academic perspective, what are the options? Well, I think more integration is required. Our patients are getting more complicated. They're living longer, polypharmacy, polymorbidity, increasing health literacy and decreasing health literacy. You know, the sort of the spectrum is getting smerged and getting ever wider, and I think we need people who are agile and able to handle that. We probably need more GP placements. We are way off the bottom end of the scale for medical schools in terms of how much GP placements they do. Now, the Department of Health and Social Care constantly have a go at Oxford saying 50% of medical graduates must become GPs. Now, that's far, and Oxford only produces about 5%. Bad Oxford. Oxford is bad. I take their point that 50% of the workforce needs to be in primary care. Okay, I accept that. But that doesn't mean that 50% of every medical school needs to become primary care physicians. There will be other medical schools that pride themselves on doing that, and we pride ourselves on something slightly different. That doesn't mean we can't do the other things. It's just that the emphasis is slightly different. But nonetheless, I mean, our students effectively, if you add it up, probably only do about 10 weeks of primary care in their entire 6 years, and that is not enough. I do totally accept that. Should we have earlier clinical placements? Now, interestingly, we were talking to the sixth formers about, you know, do you choose a medical school that's pure science and then clinical, or do you want a bit of clinical early on? And I think it helps in some ways to have earlier clinical placements to maintain motivation, to perhaps to develop the professionalism. Megan, I think, spoke very clearly on actually doing the science first. You then understand what you're doing in clinical placement and you get a chance to grow into yourself. You know, you're a bit more grown up at 21 than you are at 18, and, you know, that should be taken into account. So those are the sort of things we're battling with. Nationally, we are battling with the 2 manifestos. So both the Conservative and Labour manifestos have declared that there will be a doubling of medical student numbers over the next X years. That is a terrifying prospect. I'm not sure the GMC had been contacted about it. Certainly medical schools had whispers that it was coming, but nothing of the sense of the scale. And it's a very difficult target to reach. For my own part, I would appreciate it if the government also did something about the other ends of the pipeline, that we didn't lose quite as many doctors as we are. It slightly feels like we're training to allow for attrition, and maybe we do something about the attrition as well. If we're asked to do student expansion, how are we going to do it? We're a 6-year course. Chris Whitty has already hinted that a 6-year course is a luxury. You know, why should students do research? Well, he needs to meet Elena, I think, for a start. Perhaps he should have met Jane. That would have sorted him out. You know, why do students need? We need boots on the ground. We can do a 4-year degree, surely. Etc., etc. These are the kind of arguments that are swirling around, and Steve Barclay will have his own views. But that's something that will be a pressure coming over the hill. Oxford, I think, will not be able to expand dramatically because we just don't have the spaces, either in colleges or in terms of capital infrastructure. But we may be able to do something. Who knows? Watch this space. And any questions? That was a whistle-stop tour of both the preclinical and clinical courses, the School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences, which unfortunately the acronym reads SUMBUMS, which we really should have thought of. I didn't spot it until, because we're going to change all the emails to SMBMS Oxac UK, and Lois turned around and said, that says SUMBUMS. I was like, damn it! We should have had another name. Any questions? We need our students to waft. There's lots of questions. Can we waft microphones? Up you come, Charlie.
Where is your new building going to be, and what's going to be in it?
So, I don't know where it's going to be. It needs to be near the hospitals. I think that's really important. But the footprint is pretty crowded up the hill. And on one level, if the only place we can find is further than we might want from the acute site, the aspiration, to be honest, is to build a building that people would come from Boston and Beijing to visit. And so I think they can cross Old Road. Do you know what I mean? I think that's really what we're aiming for. If we can't find it in the perfect, and there isn't a perfect site because both sites, all sites are crowded. What will be in it? We hope what would be in it would be modern day lecture theatres, that can accommodate more than 200 students. Essentially, I would like it to be double up as a conference venue, because Oxford doesn't have a conference venue at all, really. It's got small areas like this, colleges have small, but where do you host a conference for 500 people? And that's small fry compared with some of the European ones. So it would certainly have a lecture theatre. It would have very flexible seminar room space, because we do pride ourselves on small group teaching. We would have a fake ward, a fake outpatient clinic. That answers our problem about doing our finals exams and our year 5 exams, because currently we have to shut clinical areas. We can use Tinchwick Hall, but we have to shut blue outpatients. That's lost revenue for the trust. So having some independence there. Do we move the Cairns Library? Probably not. It's such a great library where it is, but it will contain all of those sorts of things. Dedicated clinical skills and VR and simulation, which is a huge area of development. Now, VR you can do in a cupboard, because by definition you can do it in a cupboard. Simulation, really high-grade simulation, you do need more space with cameras and two-way mirror, one-way mirrors and all of that jazz, so we would have that sort of thing. We're going to do a tour of other medical schools that have great buildings. The one in Trinity College Dublin is awesome. There are a whole number of places that we need to go and have a look at. But the first bit is winning hearts and minds that this is actually something we need to do. And I hope it will be a landmark, really. Oh, God.
Hi, sorry, my name is Claire Thomas. I did medicine here with Pam McKinnon and Jane back in 1990. I was probably the second graduate entry medical student at that time, so it was all thanks to Pam and Jane for their support, and I did it in just under 4 years.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, hasn't done me any harm, but I'm just wondering, in terms of, I was a bit late to your talk, do forgive me, in terms of graduate entrance now to this, I'm down at University Hospital Southampton, North Hampshire. We have a lot of, a large proportion of our students are graduate entry.
Yeah.
I just wonder what proportion you have coming through, because we found them to be very, very motivated.
They are super. So our graduate entry envelope currently is 35 to 38, with preclinical being at maximum 165, which takes us to the Office for Students limit of 200 in clinical. Our graduate entry medics are fabulous. They're not an easy cohort. There's nothing like doing a lecture in rheumatology and discovering you have 6 immunology PhDs sitting in the room when you're finished. It's just like, you gits, you could have said something. It's me going, there's something called TNF, everyone, seriously. They are fabulous. Oxford graduate entry insists on a biomedical science subject. And will not accept psychology unless it's experimental psychology. I'm not here to defend that, but it is because the first year expects such a rapid climb in knowledge. It expects a baseline, and the whole of the first year is predicated on that. If we changed our cohort and broadened it to, for example, Cambridge accept arts and humanities students, then you've got to change your first year completely, because they would just be completely bamboozled and setting them up to fail. But that's the proportion at the moment. Yeah, and they're a fabulous group. I love them.
Could I ask you about the entrance and in particular the personal statement? I mean, some medical schools place a lot of emphasis on that, whereas, how can I put it, it was notable by its absence in your talk.
Yes, no, it's a good question. I mean, and the UCAS forms are changing, so we're not the only people. Getting to know our students is really important. Getting to know our applicants is really important. And I think, to some extent this varies. Certainly our ethos, my ethos would be that, we should, it can be a useful starting point for interview questions, but it's much more important to get to know the people in front of us. And it's much harder to, you get a much more honest and genuine opinion, I think, of students in an interview than you sometimes get in a personal statement.
The other risk of the personal statement is it's subject to grooming.
Yeah.
and tends to favour those who are from or know medical families. And ChatGPT has also caused a few problems. I mean, you can't lie in a personal statement, clearly, but I just think it's open to bias.
Yeah,
How much emphasis do you put on students having done some work experience, actually set foot in a hospital?
It's a very good question. It is, it's one of the things that's come up a lot actually when we're talking to the sixth formers. I don't think there's any replacement for understanding what a medical career is like, and I think you need to sort of see it in action before you can possibly know whether it's what you want to do. Having said that, it is now incredibly difficult to get work experience. Since COVID, it's just been a complete nightmare. So whilst we still think it's hugely important and we absolutely encourage people to do it, we are accepting that it isn't anything like as possible as it used to be, and we will take volunteering and experience of interacting with people across society in a lot of more creative ways than possibly we would have done before COVID.
Again, susceptible to the medical family.
Yeah.
You go to clinic with dad or mum or auntie or whatever, that's the problem, isn't it?
Just one retrospective comment and a prospective question. Retrospective comment is I've been going around and sort of familiarizing with medical systems all over the world, and was asked once, what is the hallmark of Oxford medicine? And I was surprised to remember 50 years ago a comment in the first lecture by John Laddingham, who said, if we have failed to teach you to be skeptical, then we have failed your medical work. And that was a wonderful sort of summary of what medical school training in Oxford is. And I think it is very true as well.
Very true.
Looking back. And the prospective comment is that when I was giving lectures to first-year medical students in Leeds, I asked them how many of them know about Deep Blue, and only one hand went up. And I said to them, sort of, nowadays, you could be the best sort of world chess champion, and you would still lose to a computer. And one of these days, you are going to be competing not with other human beings, but with AI. So what is your future, looking into the future, as it were, in terms of how to tackle and making your students sort of superior to AIs?
Do you want to take this, Charlie?
No, all yours, all yours.
I think it's enormously difficult, and I think we don't. I genuinely think the rate of change we just can't possibly begin to imagine. When I think back, my grandmother, had a black and white telly. That was a big deal. Now everybody has a phone that is colour and links to Google and blah blah blah. And I just think, good God, how unrecognisable has the world become? And that's over 2 generations. What 2 generations hence will look like, I have no idea. We had a dinner actually last night discussing this, and people were talking about the human element, the human factor of touch and kindness and so on and so forth. And I said, yes, but if you are born as a baby into a generation where your teachers or your nurses or your nannies or carers or whoever have synthetic skin and look human and touch you, that is your construct of kindness. That is your construct of humanity. So don't compare what we have now to what they might experience. I think it worries me, but I'm a bit of a technophobe. I mean, I haven't quite broken the computer in the way that Soham did, but it does still make me slightly anxious. I think there is huge utility in it. I think in areas of big data, it is going to be fabulous. I'm not sure I would train to be a radiologist or a histopathologist with the rising advent of AI, I have to say. But the tech needs to get better. What I am hopeful of is that the use of AI would give you the final line of consider diagnosis XYZ rather than the diagnosis is XYZ. Currently, radiology reports say that, they say that now, but I would hope that that's where it takes us. There is the opportunity that AI allows junior doctors like Soham and Bethan to do routine tasks that are shunted onto junior doctors that don't really require, hugely sophisticated thinking, that it could do those for them and give them more time to think more broadly, spend time in medical humanities or whatever, or spend more time with the patient. So hopefully it will free things up. I am anxious about it though. And from a preclinical and essay writing...
It's very difficult. I think... So I'd echo all of that. I think we need to think more carefully about how we set our essays. I think it is going to stop us being lazy about how we set our essays. I think at the moment, having put some of our essay titles through ChatGPT, I could spot it, but I don't know whether I could in 6 months' time. So I think we need to be more careful. I think we need to concentrate on the critical thinking aspects and not, and make it harder. But I think at the end of the day, students are going to use ChatGPT, and we're just going to have to deal with it. I think it is. So I remember I used ChatGPT at the beginning of the year for the first time. I was in Montreal this week with a user experience group who were showing me their new chat bot that's coming, where they are training nurses, right? And they have their ChatGPT is being the patient, and they're learning how to. And I took a history from ChatGPT. It's not great, but it's not bad.
In terms of at least exams, can we send the microphone while I'm prattling on? At least in terms of exams, with doing multiple choice questions, ChatGPT could probably do the exams and will probably do extremely well. You can actually put browser-safe software on things to prevent people from accessing ChatGPT. But in a way that I think my grandmother, with her black and white telly, could probably have predicted, would at least recognise the world in which we live. I'm not convinced that I will recognise the world in which my grandchildren, God willing, will live. I don't, but we'll see.
Yeah. I find this question really interesting. My first degree was in psychology in judgment and decision making in the 1980s, and this subject was discussed then. Yeah. And at that time, one of the big case studies that we looked at was actually judgment and decision making within doctors. Yeah. And the premise of it, as I recall it, was that if you asked a doctor what they based their decision, their diagnosis on, they would give you 10 different points. If you actually tested their decision making, it was usually on 3 points, one of which involved the weather, I believe. So my point, I don't see it as, obviously I was involved in neuroscience, and at that point, I don't see it as a competition. I see it as a way to elevate ourselves. Yeah. And I don't see, if I am talking to my doctor, they usually are looking at a screen. I can't see that screen. So if that screen is causing them to make a better decision, then I will never know that. Yeah. And I think that's something that I really, I find it really interesting, because that is something that this was an argument or a decision or a quandary that was placed then. So
So plus ça change, yeah. It's really interesting, some of the subjects, some of the research coming out. There was a big study looking at AI in skin conditions, and there was an AI model that was absolutely brilliant at determining melanoma against a whole host of different skin conditions. But when the program was tested, it wasn't that it picked out the colour or the edge or the rough surface or anything. What it picked out was that there was a ruler next to the lesion. Yeah. Because if it's changed in size, the practitioner had put a ruler, and that's what it's picked up. So you've got to also ask how the computer is learning and what it is basing its learning on. There was another, sorry, I know there's another question, but there was another great study on intensive care about which member of the team who worked on the intensive care unit was best at assessing prognosis. And the team who were, without fail, the best at determining prognosis were the cleaning staff. And it was based on whether there was a spare plug by the patient's bed to run the Hoover. If there was not a spare plug by the patient's bed, they were going to die. Because there were so many machines. Yeah. So, it's human input-output and machine input-output can go in strange directions. Was there another question? Lucy.
Can we make this the last one? that
Fine.
reasonable?
Yeah, I've got maybe two questions then. One
Really quick.
Okay. Firstly, relating to the previous discussion, like I can't see there not being a situation soon in which, for example, you get blood results from a jaundiced patient and the computer can tell you what it is they've got. So there's no need for that doctor even to be there to make that diagnosis. I know that doesn't mean they can't then manage the patient, but they need to. The doctor who is there looking at the AI diagnosis needs to be able to interpret that. And is there any way you're going to look at teaching medical students on the more either the computational side or more about how they're dealing with?
I think we're going to have to. I mean, we already have that somewhat with ECGs. You can't have an ECG now without normal sinus rhythm in the top right-hand corner. It's quite difficult to ignore it. To go, oh, I haven't seen that. Oh, it looks like normal sinus rhythm. You know, so we already have an element of that. And yes, undoubtedly, we are going to have to teach our students how to handle AI. I think what I struggle with is it's a moving target. I don't know what to teach them about or teach. You know, I think there are two other big areas that the medical curriculum needs to catch up. One is genomics, and we're not covering genomics in any kind of level of detail that we should, and the other is social determinants of health, at two opposite ends, if you like, of the academic spectrum. So I think my eyes, slightly iguana-like, are on those two opposite ends of the spectrum, because at the moment I don't know what we should be doing with AI. And, you know, a computer can look and say, well, the ALK phos is up, so that's cholestatic versus ALT, which is, you know, hepatitic. But the complexity of everything else that goes with the patient, I think, will still rely on human judgment, but perhaps that's arrogance. Perhaps that is pure arrogance that we are the ones to determine, because actually computers are better than that.
I think the rate of change is extraordinary. It's North Week now, so we had our intake last year, and I work research side on a very computational subject where we spent a lot of North Week this time last year teaching our students the basics of coding. And this year we're teaching them the basics of how to get ChatGPT to code. Yeah. And that's in a year.
Yeah, terrifying.
I did have a second question and it's more practical. MLA, will everyone sit it at the same time?
So, yeah, this is a really good question. They can't all sit it at the same time because, of course, this is an international exam. So there will be papers generated in 3 batches, as it were, and medical schools sign up for a particular batch. But the sense is that they will be equivalent. It is basically like the USMLE, it's just we've never had one. Or membership exams. You know, I will have done a different MRCP Part 1 to my consultant colleagues, but we both got it. Right.
Will there be a practical component?
So the practical component is our OSCE, which the GMC just have to sign off as meeting their requirements. So the OSCE is the same, but the written paper is where we've lost our autonomy. Yeah. Thanks. I think you're scything us at this point.
Yeah, probably because in 10 minutes we're due across the road. Yes, thank you very much. Okay, so many thanks for still being here in good numbers. A whole list of people to thank. Shall I carry on, Griselda, or do you want to do this? You're right.
We also need to thank you, Elaine, so I don't know how we're going to...
Well, don't worry about that.
No, we do worry about
I want to say thank you to all the speakers who have been amazing. We've gone far and wide today, haven't we? Absolutely.
Elaine, may we interrupt you? Can I interrupt this? I have to speak. Because these are for you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Right, back to my list.
Hang on. And these are for drink.
Any more? Okay, I want to thank the current tutors. That was a brilliant session. I want to thank the student helpers who've run around with the microphones and all the other things they've done. I want to thank those who are now young doctors who've come and spoken to us. Thank you also to the ones who've done videos, which we haven't had time to look at. I want to thank the sixth formers who made this a very interesting, wide age group time. Admin, who've been fantastic. The AV team. The principal for coming and starting us off. And to come, those who are producing the tributes and going to speak at the dinner. There are probably other things, but that was just what I came up with. Thank you to you all. Thank you very much to all of you who've come and made it such a splendid occasion. Not sure about the next one, because Griselda and I won't be running it. So we're looking for new blood. And so if you're interested, please get in touch.